Welcome to the tutorial series for Route Coordinator. This tutorial will explain how to assign a trip for a client, assign a round trip for a client, modify a trip, and delete a trip. This window is the main screen for the Route Coordinator product. In order to get to the Trips tab, it's at the top. It's the third tab from the right. You would click on the Trips tab and it will open the Trips window. There are three columns in the Trips window. We want to start with the right column, which is the clients column, and as you can see all your clients are listed there from A to Z. You would use the little scroll bar to go up or down. There also is a client search field where you can type in the client's name and it will find the client. So for example, I want to type in Beal, B-E-A-L, and it will find my client Curtis Beal. It's listed here at the bottom. You would click on Curtis and it will bring his name to the top of the column and also list his name here. So now you're ready to work with that particular client. For my example, I would like to use Marion Addy. I clicked on her name and now Marion's name is listed above the column, so now we're ready to work with that client. So now we want to move to the left column and start at the top. The first field we want to deal with is the trip description. The trip description will be the descriptor of the trip. You can type in there anything you would like. It defaults to the words new trip. So in this case, just for example, Marion called and said, I would like to go to the trip to the doctor. So we're going to schedule a trip to the doctor for Marion. So in this case, we could call this particular trip Doctor Trip. The next field we go to is to the pickup location information fields. There is a quick way to add in Marion's information. We do know that we're going to pick Marion up from her home. So you can click on the box called Same as Client Address. When you do that, we know we're working with Marion. It went to the client's fields and pulled their home information into the pickup location fields. So we have home, she lives on Wilshire Lane in Janesville, her apartment, and her zip code. So that way you don't have to type it in. It's just a quick way to pull in Marion's home information into those fields. The next fields we want to look at is the drop-off location information. We want to think about where are we dropping Marion off, and we know when she called we're going to drop her off at the doctor's office. You should have already developed a database about common locations. If you click on common locations, it will open a window and it will show all of the common locations that you have put into the database. For this example, we know that we're taking Marion to the doctor's. Here's the Beloit Clinic. You would double click on it and it will open up, or it will pull the information from the common locations and place it into the drop-off location. Again, not having to type, so it's a quick way to pull information in without having to retype it. I want to talk a little bit about the orange flags, and we have an orange flag for the pickup location and an orange flag for the drop-off location. Orange flags say that the program does not recognize those addresses as correct addresses, but I'll talk about that in a little bit later as we go through this. The next section we want to look at is the trip information. The first field we want to talk about is the trip status. In trip status, it's a drop down and there's different options we can choose from. Active, no-show, suspended, completed, and you can see the list. But in this case we know Marion's trip is active, so that's the one we will select. The next field is purpose type. Purpose type are purposes for the trip. Many agencies have to list for billing purposes or reporting purposes why the person took that trip, and so we do have a list of those items here. If there are some other additional ones that you would like to add, certainly we can add to those that list also. But this is an optional field. You can use it or not use it. But in this case we're taking Marion to a medical appointment, so we're going to choose medical. The program type is definitely user defined, and your agency can put any items there that you choose. For our example, we just put in bus, car, van, volunteer, group, special, and for our example I'm just going to say that we're going to take Marion on the van. The next one is payment type. How is Marion going to pay for this trip? And previously you should have already put in billing information. From the information you put in the billing tab pulls into this field. For this example, Marion's going to pay per mile, and so that's the one I chose. The next section is the trip date. What date is Marion going to take the trip? The blue box identifies the current date, and a yellow box would identify the date of the trip. Let's say Marion is going to take a trip on Monday, October 24th. I would just click on that date and it would put a yellow orangish box around that date. You can move the months. You can use the arrow to go to different months, the other arrow to go back other months. You can also go back years. Also in this particular box, there's another tab called Miscellaneous or Trip Miscellaneous. If you click on that, there are options in this particular window that you'd want to look at, but the one I particularly want to point out is the Companion on Trip. You would select that if you would have a companion going with Marion, such as maybe her husband to help assist her in some way, a aide to assist her in some way, and when you actually follow through and do your reporting, it will show that Marion had a companion. So you would just click on it if she did have a companion. Further down, there are time fields, and we look at the time fields to show if she has an appointment time, and that field's right here. She specifically says, I have a 3 o'clock doctor's appointment and I have to get there by 3 o'clock. And that's a firm appointment. If you're using our auto-loading program, that would tell the computer to make sure that Marion gets there by her appointment time. Don't stop and pick anybody up. Don't stop and drop anybody off. We just need to pick Marion up and get her to that appointment. And that's optional. You can put that in or not put that in. The pickup time is what time are you going to pick your client up for their trip. There's sometimes that you don't know what time you're going to pick them up, so you can leave that unchecked. But if you do know, if you're an agency that always tells your clients, I'm going to pick you up at this specific time, then here's where you would put in the time. And let's say, for example, we're going to pick Marion up at 3 p.m. Now you can either use your arrow keys on your computer keyboard, use the arrow keys here in the field, or you can actually just type in 00 and the numbers on your keyboard. I'll talk a little bit about the estimated drop-off time in a moment. We also talk about quadrants. Quadrants are ways to separate your areas and your vans or vehicles. Some agencies separate their service areas into quadrants, such as the north side, east side, south side, west side, and it's just a way of when you go and load your clients onto vehicles and then the vehicles go and drop people off, that you're sort of putting people in the like areas, and you would have already assigned quadrants in your vehicle area. So for this example, we're going to say Marion's in quadrant 1. So at this point you pretty much have all your information about the trip in. You've got the name of the trip, where we're picking Marion up, where we're dropping Marion off, what kind of trip it is, what kind of vehicle she's going to go on, who's going to pay for it, the date, and the time. And I always review that before I actually save the trip. So now you want to go save the trip. You would come over to this button here, Save New Trip, and you click on it once. Another window will pop up and say, do you want to save this trip? And you'd go yes. Now at this point, remember before our flags were orange. Once we save the new trip, the computer goes out and looks at the mapping program, and now it says, yes, I do recognize those as good addresses. So we do see that now we have good addresses and that the computer now has been able to find that address. Also, I talked a little bit about the calculate field. We had just typed in 3 p.m. Once I hit save new trip, what the computer does is it goes out and it looks, if we pick Marion up at 3 at this location, how long is it going to take to get from this location to this location? And in this case, it's 20 minutes. So if you're on the phone with a client, the client says, well, how long would my trip take? Here's just an estimated time that you can give them. So that's how you would save a new trip, just the simplest trip. Now I want to talk a little bit about the round trip. Industry standards always says that a trip is a one-way trip. Pick up to drop off, pick up to drop off. That's one way. Now in this case we want to bring Marion home. We got her to the doctor, now we have to bring her home. So now we want to do a round trip, and you have to do that separately. But it's very easy and very quick. So right now if you look at the screen, we're saying that we're picking her up at Wilshire and we're dropping her off at the doctor. But now we got to get her home. So you would come up to the little button here at the very top and it says flip. You would just click on that, and now it's showing that we would pick them up at the clinic and we would drop her off back at home. So now it's just flip the information. It has the same purpose type, program type, how much we're paying, even the same date and time. But we know we don't want to drop her off and pick her up at the same time. So what we would do is, let's say we're going to pick her up at 5 p.m. Now what we do is we come over here and we would say save new trip. It would say, are you sure you want to save the trip? Again, it's telling you where, the date, and the time, and you go yes. So now all of the trips are located in this area here, a sort of historical information. So you can see here we have the first one listed as the doctor trip on the 24th at 3 p.m. And you can see here's the information, her home to the doctor's, the date and the time. If we click on this trip here, it shows we're taking her from the clinic to home, the date and the time. So your historical information is here. So that's pretty much how you would schedule a one-way trip, and then how to make that trip a round trip. How to modify a trip. Let's say, for example, Marion calls and says, gee, I know my doctor's appointment is going to be later than 5. It will be 6 o'clock, so I need to change the time. So we're not going to delete that particular trip. We're just going to modify it. So I would click on the trip that I want to modify, and so you're seeing the information here. And now we're just going to modify the 5 o'clock time to the 6 o'clock time. Now instead of saving a new trip, this is a modify the trip, because this trip is already in place. We're just modifying it, and you would just click once to modify it. It will say the trip's been modified. Okay. Now if you look at the screen, we see here that the trip is at 6 p.m. Easy as that. Now let's say Marion calls. Today is Friday, and Marion calls and says, on Monday I'm going to need a ride to the doctor, but my husband's going to pick me up from the doctor and take me home. So she only needs the one-way trip. So I want to in fact delete or cancel the trip home. You would select the trip that you want to delete or cancel, come over here and click on the button delete trip. Are you sure you want to delete the trip? Yes. And the trips, as soon as we have that, the trip is gone. So now we only have the trip where we pick her up at home and then bring her to the clinic. Now, a word of warning, you never want to delete a trip that's in the past. Past information is historical. You never want to delete anything that's past or that would have already happened. It's okay to delete a trip that may be sometime in the future, but nothing that's in the past. So that really concludes our tutorial for our route coordinator for how to assign a trip, how to assign a round trip, how to modify a trip, and delete a trip. Thank you, and I hope you found this helpful.